He had broken protocol far too many times. Now he was being reined in. It was not taken well by Kurt, who was recently divorced, the likely cause of his insubordination. He had gotten good and loaded and called his sergeant, leaving her a series of long, drawn-out rants labeling her a Nazi and a cunt. Besides, meetings were being held and he was on leave without pay, day drinking at a Mexican restaurant in the neighborhood, flushing out the toxins in the world with ice-cold jalapeno margaritas. He felt welcome there, the only gay bar in the whole neighborhood, keeping the heathen sports fanatics and high-fiving motherfuckers at bay. Kurt had infiltrated an onion of Chinese crime in the International District, immersed for months in working side-by-side Chinese dealers, bringing China White into town as well as developers beginning to buy up property and construct condominiums. Along the way, the old man running the gambling parlor had gotten him hooked on poppy tea, ingested daily along with alcohol. He had lost his wife to the drink, and instead of changing his ways, he only increased his intake, trying to wash it all away. He didn't have the balls to put a gun barrel in his mouth. But he was more than happy to be swallowed in the pit of alcoholic shame and despair, which had haunted his childhood. His days as a narc had come to a close. In the end, he was given a fair deal for the leads he had brought to the table, his intel insurmountable. Most were sad to see him go down in flames, but Kurt didn't care much for the lot of the force. He had spent too much time underground and was more comfortable with the quote-unquote enemy than he ever was with the others in his squad. He was allowed to keep his pension and granted it early as part of his negotiations with the union. Kurt and his wife had put their home up for sale without incident. He took up residence in an old sailboat on a rent-to-own basis. Kurt had taken out an ad in the Times as well as the street rags that he was a PI for hire, not quite ready to spend his days drinking. He wanted work. He had just returned from grocery shopping, popping a Valium, cracking a beer, and putting his feet up. His basset hound was thrilled to see him. Kurt had named him Boris after the Russian president, face sagging like an old woman's cleavage or an old man's ass. Kurt turned the radio to 98.1 to catch the live broadcast out of St. James Cathedral, a choir which aired every Sunday evening. He hated the idea of a social life. The prospect made him sick. People were at large tried and predictable. He loved these nights, especially with the rain pattering down. No human interaction necessary. His disdain for humanity had likely been spawned out of a childhood spent moving town to town and then house to house, never allowing him to put down roots, forever the new kid, never quite welcomed by the cliques that children form. He was a loner, he was self-driven, never in need of praise or celebration. He was aware of his talents and his defects all at once. He despised attention and the herd mentality, a wolf among sheep. Around 9 p.m., as his eyes were growing heavy, the telephone rang, giving him a jolt. The number was blocked on his caller ID. His mind traveled to ancient forms of contact. Talking drums used to warn other tribesmen traveling over a mile. Cobain Human Services, he spoke into the receiver. There was a long pause. The voice shook, traffic roaring in the background, obviously at a payphone. I'm trying to find my son. I think he joined a cult. Mormons near Escalante, living on a large acreage. Someone reported they was working with aliens, using children as guinea pigs. Can we meet and to talk about this? Kurt replied softly, hearing how broken she sounded. Why, of course. How old was he, may I ask? She replied, 18. We were trying to work with a private investigator out of Park City, but have not heard from him. Almost as if he fell off the edge of the earth. I fear my house and telephone have been bugged by cult members. My husband is taking this the worse, unable to eat and sleeping all day. The Police say there is nothing they can do about it as our son is of age. She sounded spent and burned out, like a mother calling from beyond the grave. It made Kurt's heart ache just a bit, that cold sense of desperation in her voice, the token of someone barely hanging on. He decided to get some rest, the two deciding on coffee in the morning, neither one of them keeping an appetite with the subject at hand. Black Coffee was the site of their meeting, and Black Coffee Corporation was the site of their meeting, and Kurt arrived early to stake out a good seat, wanting to see who was entering and exiting the establishment. He ordered 2 macchiatos and took a seat near the entrance facing the door. It was early, and those walking in were half awake. Kurt had been up since 5, having needed to walk Boris and enjoy a wake and bake while reading the paper. The boy's mother's name was Doris, and Kurt had asked her to bring a recent photograph of her son. The boy's name was Luke. Around 9:15, she sauntered into the coffee shop. Kurt recognized the voice by nervous body language. He approached her, introducing himself and paying for her coffee. They took a seat at the table, simultaneously reaching for their cigarettes, almost as if being screamed at by a drill sergeant to do so. Kurt often joked cigarettes were Satan's pacifiers. She eased up a bit, relaxed by Kurt's casual presentation and demeanor, his hair long and pulled in a ponytail to keep out of his food, and of course avoiding getting it ripped out during a brawl, which he had learned the hard way. Kurt inquired, "How did the intel come to you about the children being used as test subjects? Is this a case of Mormonism or satanic polygamy?" She replied, "It sort of skirts the gray area. It was both. Some of the compound are Jack Mormons, others are Holy Rollers. The Jack Mormons tend to take the role as the big guns, the muscle behind the compound, where I've been told by a neighbor often has triangular lights coming and going to the site at nightfall." She continued, "The neighbor also revealed that the car bombing of a bishop was said to have been verified as a hit ordered by Preston Longhorn, the head honcho calling the shots and keeping a steady pace of impregnating each of his 15 wives. However far-fetched this may sound, it's further been reported the extraterrestrials are providing an elixir of youth to Preston and his wives." People in this part of the country love gossip, a perfect backdrop for the facts at hand. Kurt scribbled away in his notebook as Doris spoke. "Do you have an address?" Doris provided one, claiming she was not allowed access past the front gate and had guns drawn on her, instructing her and her husband to get lost. The local police in the area would have nothing to do with the matter, their pockets lined with Jesus money. Kurt saw and felt her true desperation, and it gave him a sinking feeling in his gut. His empathetic side strong when it came to crying old women. He could care less about the kid who seemed a snot. He would take the case on for the mother, his disdain for the youth being that he was dumb enough to be weaseled into a cult existence and not think twice about the family he was leaving behind. Doris has said he was adopted, and it could have been a driving factor. Doris remarked the boy's mother had been from Bethel, Alaska, and he had lived a troubled youth, expelled from every school he attended. This piece of information was vital, for it was proved that all the kid ever wanted was acceptance. Unlike Kurt, who happily fell into the role of the loner, Luke followed a herd mentality, thinking he had found his people out there in the middle of the fucking desert. In Kurt's eyes, he needed a good slap in the mouth. They wrapped up their meeting with Kurt providing Doris with his pager number, telling her to contact him day or night. He also made an arrangement to have his friend Buzz complete a sweep of their house and telephone for bugs and a phone tap. You could see the weight drop off her shoulders. She had hugged him, walking towards the door and drying her eyes. Kurt needed a drink, a shot and a beer for good measure. Too early for a Long Island. He headed towards Beth's Cafe, familiar faces in a familiar haunt. day drinkers and lonely-hearted poets of disaster and malice. After his second beer, he took his 1966 Volvo Amazon in for a full tune-up. He needed her in the most operational state and also wanted to have her brakes checked after they had failed on him months earlier and not trusting the mechanic, no matter how much he knew about old Volvos. He would take it to Jimmy the Greek for a final word. Resources limited in the scathing Utah desert, filled with inbred Aryan children and Chevy Silverado owners. It was no friendly landscape for German cars. The elixir of youth, eh? This was his first bout with the paranormal. In fact, it seemed to be his specialty. This was not his first bout with the paranormal. In fact, it seemed to be his specialty, often assigned as backup by the FBI for his expertise in ancient practices of shamanism and soul retrieval. Kurt knew an old medicine man who lived in a shack on the backside of Beacon Avenue South. His name was Creighton Running Bear, a Blackfoot out of Montana. He was big medicine. Kurt greeted him that afternoon with a tobacco twist and a strong hug. It brought Kurt joy to be in his presence, finding so much darkness in the world and forever at odds between good and evil. Creighton spoke. I sent you come to me today to find a blessing on your trip. First off, I want you to take this cedar. You're going to need it. Creighton handed over a leather pouch. He looked Kurt dead in the eye. You need to journey. It has been too long since you have journeyed. The spirits are growing lonely, my brother. Kurt hung his head in shame. It is a shamanic practice to be a master of astral projecting. One can travel to the underworld using holes in the earth as portals or toilet drains of being detained. It is a practice of entering the unseen world. Dangerously, one can travel into the portal of a modem or internet cable. This is especially dangerous, and the last time Kurt journeyed, it was through a modem, his body going into micro-convulsions from the evil he witnessed. It would not be the last time he journeyed into the middle world through a modem. The underworld was a place of peace, lacquered with spirits and truth. Creighton spoke once more. You were out of line with how you handled the sergeant. It brought shame on you and your relations. Women are the center of the universe. The womb of life suffers when we become savages toward women. It's a work in progress. You're still young, but do not forget this and watch always how you walk. Walk as a positive warrior, and your life will become enriched. Swallow your pride, Kurt. I'm not angry. I merely want you to be reminded of what you already know. Even I disgrace the spirits at times. Creighton's words were wise and taken to heart. Kurt figured a road trip to be the best medicine for his recent fall from grace. He picked up a 5-gallon water jug. The chances of needing to cool the engine high. With no air conditioning, it would be a clammy ride through the desert. On those long stretches, he would clock high speeds. He packed the necessities: spare wheel, AR-15, sawed-off shotgun, plastic cuffs, Army issue 45, morphine dissolvable tablets, Army issue med kit, case of beer and 2/5 of Jameson, mushrooms and pot hidden inside of a Fox typewriter, along with ground poppy pods for his nightly tea. He would make it in a day and a half if he really booked it. He had been given contact information of Preston Longhorn's neighbor. A wife by the name of Susan Etling had took his call, her husband hollering in the background, "That alligator reptilian fucking bastard." Kurt had covered the phone as he laughed, having been quite stoned in the moment, and forever appreciating grumpy old men with foul mouths. He would meet with Susan, who offered to let him pitch a tent on their property as long as he didn't mind being awoken by 7 a.m. construction and daily work on the barn. Kurt felt the goodness in her voice coming through the telephone, some sort of sonic vibration and sheets of purple weighing on his mind. He drove straight through, finally ending up in Loa, staying at a cozy motel with green shag carpet paintings of cowboys on the walls. Crisp no smoking signs posted about the room. His appearance triggered most in this region of the country, where you had to leave the entire state to buy real beer if you weren't purchasing it from a bootlegger who could easily drive the prices through the roof. Kurt's case of Mickey's was likely a beacon of light shining down from heaven. He had brought his own coffee, as this was a landscape filled with Paro drinking jackals. Kurt dumped a shot of Jameson in his coffee and hit the road. The next morning, feeling the heat pressing down like Lucifer's bonfire of despair. Kurt pulled into Susan and Troy's property. An array of beasts gathered about the acreage, chickens, hogs, and kittens. Susan invited Kurt in for pinion coffee. He asked her if she smoked, and she said she had quit a year earlier, pulling out a tiny saucer and handing it to him, just like Kurt's mother always had done for him. Susan came right out with it. You know you could get thrown in the pen for kidnapping charges if this thing doesn't float the way you want it to. Kurt was quiet, gazing through the arroyos leading to the well of the compound several hundred yards from any structure. He could also see through the binoculars that a birthday party was being set up, complete with piñata. Kurt needed to act fast. No Mormon birthday complete without tang and country time lemonade. Kurt needed to act immediately. The arroyos provided plenty of cover in the half-light, a string of white lights set up around the tables. He didn't hesitate for 1 second, dumping the entire mason jar full of LSD into the water supply. Kurt figured by midnight the guards would be playing with their flashlights. Their guns they carried a bit on the hairy side, but Kurt was a risk taker. He imagined Preston trying to regain his sense of authority, liable to take his clothes off and go running through the desert. The sight of him to his followers would surely elicit laughter, the presence of authority comedic and horrifying all at once. LSD, the portal to the unseen world. Now it was a waiting game, Kurt keeping surveillance with military night vision. He also had several EMP grenades and listening devices for long-range surveillance. Susan pointed to Luke's bungalow, mentioning he was one of 2 people of color on the whole compound, usually seen shoveling manure or tending to the horses. From his headphones, Kurt picked up a sign that the LSD had made it into the juice. Maniacal laughter, like a hyena that had just consumed an ounce of Matanuska thunderfuck. He witnessed 2 men rolling on the ground laughing hysterically, the 2 of them guards. Several women were dancing to low music and traced by the midnight wind trailing through the branches. In an hour, the ship was set to land. Right when they were all peaking. This would be the perfect diversion to snag Luke from the bungalow. Kurt hated it, but he would need to dose the kid with Rufinol in order to get him to follow to the Amazon so they could hit the road. Kurt railed to Ritalin, gazing at the sunset burning like an oil painting in cardinal red. He feared cult retaliation more than he feared getting pinned for kidnapping. He imagined the beings on the ship would all be soured by the state, that all but 5 of them were heavily dosed on LSD. Kurt threw on his FBI windbreaker and made sure the Fox badge was easily accessible. He grabbed his sawed-off shotgun, 45 in his shoulder holster, EMP grenade connected to his belt. He scattered like a mountain lion gnawing at the midnight air, driven, focused, senses all on high alert, struggling to ease the tremor in his hand. He circled around the backside of the bungalow, which was more of an old chicken coop than anything else. At a low volume, you could hear Roy Orbison playing on a stereo from within. Kurt knocked softly as to not give the kid a jolt. He came to the door dressed in a No Fear t-shirt and wearing Dickies Doc Martens to boot. Kurt drew his gun on the kid, motioning for him not to scream. The kid did it as he was told, getting down on his knees and placing his hands behind his back. Kurt strung him up with nylon plastic cuffs, producing a syringe and injecting the fluid into his arm. A balmy wave of glee came over the kid, eyes dilating. Calmly he asked Kurt, "So where are you taking me?" Kurt replied, "We're going home, kid, but you're going to take the long way, and you'll love it." He continued, "Ever see the redwoods, Luke?" Luke laughed, higher than hell. "Let's go check it out." "Hell no, I ain't never seen no goddamn redwoods. Just on TV and in school." Luke asked Kurt, "I got one request. Can you bring my Roy Orbison cassettes?" Despite the danger of the situation, Kurt chuckled, loading them into his bag. "You got good taste, kid," Kurt remarked. Slowly they cracked the door on the bungalow, Luke telling Kurt which switch was the motion-censored floodlight Kurt had rolled the dice on upon entry. They took off, dashing through several arroyos until they reached Susan and Troy's acreage. Kurt asked the kid if he had to piss and switched to his cuffs to the front, allowing him to relieve himself. He also made sure the kid got a good swill of clean water to stay hydrated. With Susan and Troy asleep and Kurt needing to hit the road immediately, he left her a sage bundle as well as a braid of sweetgrass. Given the length of time he had spent in the bungalow, Kurt had failed to hear the craft land, as UFOs generally operated without sound. But he had caught a glimpse of the ship, docked and surrounded by what looked like anteater-faced men, the hands of octopus covered in hair. The creatures seemed highly perplexed, emitting disgust, several women dancing with no clothes on in front of the hangar. By the time Kurt and the kid made it into his car, the craft had disappeared. Kurt and the kid drove straight through the night, connecting to Route 80, headed through Reno towards Route 101. The two stopped in Elko so they could get some proper sleep. Kurt had a custom clamp for the hotel room door, which allowed him to seal it while he slept, as to not have the kid take off. Luke had tried to assure him, but Kurt wasn't so trusting. The two of them slept a total of 24 hours. When Luke awoke, his recollection of the days prior were hazy and mostly scrambled due to the roof and all, for which Kurt had apologized. The kid's behavior had changed. He had gone from a 1,000-yard stare to having the light fill his eyes once more. He had been suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. Kurt knew it all along. To further drive the point home that the kid was better off without the cult, he handed the kid an ice-cold Mickey's. "This will put hair on your ass and thunder in your step. High gravity, baby." Luke chuckled, continuing to feel the weight of his captors at the cult compound fade away. Finally, Kurt asked the kid, "So tell me about the aliens. What was that all about?" Luke asked Kurt for a cigarette, body language changing, his shoulders sinking, looking like he wanted to lock himself in a bathroom and never come out. There was a trade, infants for the elixir, collection of blood from the compound being traded, all in exchange for elixir. The children were sometimes brought back to the compound, but a lot of them were traded, a mystery to what sort of demise awaited them. It was said that the car bombing of the bishop was ordered by a head extraterrestrial claiming the bishop had engaged in child molestations. After eating a hearty lunch of some Basque food, the two took off out of Elko with the pedal to the metal. The kid hollered, "I want to put on some Roy Orbison." Kurt found it hilarious, opening the glove box. The road of flat arrow on fire, heading straight towards the outskirts of Los Angeles, a city of lost hope in Kurt's eyes. Failed actors, drugs, the mob, street gangs, redlined by the American dream. The two would only pass through on their way to connect up with the 101, Kurt finding the drive up safer than the drive down. After many a high-speed hour, the two were eventually on the outskirts of Crescent City, arriving at the Redwood Creek trailhead. The two exited the Amazon 122S, Kurt trading out his Jack Purcells for a pair of Nikes, ready to take the hike down the switchbacks. Water loaded in his Army tactical backpack along with snacks. Kurt's mood was elated, having never seen trees so large, feeling as if he were on another planet. When they reached the bottom of the trail along the creek, they were walking amongst the ancients, the two of them taking in the power of the trees, touching them and staring upward, branches scratching at the bottom of God's bathtub. The cheer of birds was strong, the sight far more holy than anything the kid had experienced on the compound. Luke was mystified, engrossed in the life along the forest floor, playing with banana slugs and watching the frogs along the shade upon the shore. As the two were gathering themselves for the hike back up to the parking lot, there appeared a powerful sign for Kurt. An elk, a buck, looking strong and healthy. Something radiating in its glassy eyes that drew Kurt in, for it was the creatures of the deer family that were his power animal. Kurt took out some tobacco, leaving it on the ground as a spiritual offering for the elk, who stared long and hard, drilling into Kurt's eyes for 5 long minutes and then slowly meandering through the brush of the dense forest floor. Cursing and sweating their way along, the two climbed the switchbacks, the foliage changing, the sun falling behind a cloud. As Kurt led the way, his blood went ice cold. There, standing in the middle of the trail, was what could only be described as Sasquatch. Eyes beady and swirling in ancient mystery, it raised its arms, falling into a blood-curdling scream. As it made its way down the hill, Kurt drew on the beast, firing several rounds into its chest with his father's .45. The bullets had no impact. Shedding through the undergrowth from behind the missing link, the elk charged the Bigfoot at full speed, impaling the creature. The Bigfoot had fallen to its knees as the portal opened, badly gored, diving through the wormhole, followed by an intense blast of radiated light. Kurt and Luke stood motionless, their hearts pounding like greyhounds at the track, minds churning at 7,000 RPM. Kurt collapsed at his knees, Luke rocking back and forth, speechless and possibly on the skirted edge of shock. Kurt tossed the kid his flask. "Take a long swill, kid. I don't want you going into shock. I'll carry you out of here if I have to." Luke took a nice long swill, lying down flat on his back and regaining his nerve. Finally, the two were calm enough to make it back to the Amazon. Immediately, Kurt questioned the appearance of the creature with having an inference by extraterrestrial life, who had underestimated Kurt's connection to the spirits of the deer. The two made their way just a few miles north, pulling into Crescent City for the night. They ended up crashing at a Super 8 motel, complete with a diseased pond and a once brand new swimming pool. The town was rich in what Kurt categorized as large-scale meth activity. Kurt picked up another bottle of Jameson and a Swisher Sweet, feeling a strong urge to heavily decompress. The two shared a blunt over Kurt's pal John Jameson on the rocks. It was nice to be drunk, problems waiting in the morning bright and early. This case had been fucked. He had not expected the Sasquatch, yet now it was a sure product of the extraterrestrial sending it his way to assassinate him. I hope you're having lots of fun trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show. Which brings up a good point about me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. End quote. The Zodiac Killer. The next morning, Kurt was greeted by rolling eyes as he ordered a beer at 11 a.m. at the local diner. What a hag, he commented. Luke chuckled. Earlier that morning, Kurt had taken the kid to Kmart to get him a couple sets of new good clothes. It had been fun for Luke, whose adopted father never took him on such adventures. Kurt had picked up a copy of Ill Communication by the Beastie Boys. He also snagged some cuts from their punk rock roots with the purchase of Aglio e Olio. Luke had seemed like the young man he was before. In just several days, he was filled with genuine smiles and laughter. There had been nothing humorous at the compound. He was grateful that Kurt had picked him up, and as added protection, Kurt had given the kid some rose quartz to keep in his pocket. Protection from alien and cult members alike. Each morning, Kurt had smudged the kid with sweetgrass and owl feather. It seemed to have been good medicine for Luke. He had even placed a phone call home to his mother, telling her he would be home in several days. She sounded uplifted in the brief moment Kurt had spoken with her. What was the voice which had scared Luke enough to take a Greyhound all the way to Salt Lake City? Kurt had questioned the kid, but he had received nothing but silence. Kurt felt like pressing the idea further. As they skirted around the curves in the right-hand lane of the 101, Kurt pressed Luke once more. Finally he replied, "I hear voices." He continued, "They led me to Preston, who I met at a McDonald's parking lot, and offered me to work after he had seen me flying a sign with no luck." Kurt remarked, "That's the serious roll of the dice." Luke commented, "I needed to get inside. This was in the fall, and I wasn't equipped to spend the winter sleeping on pallets at the train station." Kurt mulled it over. "How long did you live with schizophrenia?" Luke paused. "I still don't think I was hearing imaginary voices. I'm so convinced there's been tiny speakers implanted in my ear canals and connected up to my nervous system. The chances of it were science fiction, or were they?" Luke didn't want to discuss it any further and remained silent, a drop in his cheery afternoon mood. Kurt produced a metal prototype. "Cheer up, Luke. Let it pass through you." Luke's face had a drooping frown to it. The hit, well needed in soothing his inner dialogue, which he explained to Kurt grew louder and quieter depending on the day. He had been out of his clonazepam for weeks and would surely benefit from it, silencing his inner dialogue. A sadness washed over Kurt, he too struggling with his own inner demons, given electroconvulsive therapy, having not responded to anything else. Kurt was still in awe of the episode with the Sasquatch. He had only heard of sightings in person at an old job of his where a Green Beret had a late-night encounter with the beast outside his tent, having scared it off with a gunshot. Kurt was convinced it was not just a matter of chance encounter, that it was somehow connected to the happenings in the Ephraim area. Although Kurt had not journeyed in months, the appearance of his power animal was a true testament to his training in the ancient art of journeying. That whole week, Kurt's dreams involved falling, being chased, and being interrogated. Strange beings dressed in human clothing appearing and reappearing. Kurt knew most people would be skeptics of his encounters, long knowing of his relationship with psychedelics. Luke had agreed to go through with questioning once he returned to Seattle. Kurt knew a female agent who the kid would likely open up with, hoping to spawn an investigation. Kurt was cynical that it would go much further than just questioning, given his knowledge of the feds and the paranormal. Long rumored and to some known, the government worked hand in hand with extraterrestrials. To cap it with Bigfoot getting gored by a deer would be the icing on the cake, likely to end up in the shredder, along with all data collected. Even still, Kurt knew a couple of good agents who would take their word for it, Kurt having helped them in past cases. Lucas had said he had heard that the car bomb had been engineered by Preston's brother. Kurt couldn't wait for this whole thing to blow over. As the car cruised into Cannon Beach, Oregon, the two pulled off the highway to take in the monstrosity of Haystack Rock, a monstrous sea stack along the shore, swirling with tourists. Kurt pulled out his prototype and took a long pull, followed by a swill from his flask, which he jokingly referred to as his canteen. Feeling a nice buzz come on, Kurt asked Luke, "Don't you have any dreams? If you could do anything, what would you do?" The kid replied, "Mortician. I would be a mortician." Kurt scoffed kindly. "What the hell's stopping you?" Luke felt this wave of shame draping over him. "I don't even have a fucking GED. Kurt thought about it for a moment, then he spoke. "What if I signed you up with a girl I'm sort of dating? She's a tutor, very bright, very patient, highly attractive. What could go wrong?" Luke thought about it for a minute. "I mean, I guess so. I saw things and heard things on that compound that will haunt my dreamscapes for the remainder of my life. I shit you not. From perverted to violent, the very worst in humanity." He spoke further on the topic, having warmed up to Kurt. I fear they will come after my foster parents as retaliation." Kurt had developed a rapport with the kid, no longer filled with animosity. "What if I track down your mother in Bethel? I'll cut you a deal. If you get your GED, I will track down your mother and either fly her down or fly you up, whatever is easiest." There was a long pause and Kurt slyly looked out the side of his eye. The kid had tears running down his face and was wearing a smile, tears of joy. He spoke. "You would do that for me?" Kurt responded, taking a long drag and then flicking his cigarette out the window. "It would be an honor, kid. I think your life would be going in all the better of direction if you established a connection with your birth mother. You probably have hundreds of family members you don't even know about with your Yupik blood." Kurt had made headway and gained trust. A moment later, the song Miracles came shifting over the radio waves. Classic Jefferson Starship. He handed the prototype to the kid. Kurt was grateful he drove, knowing if he had landed in SLC and driven down a rental car as an open and shut case, that Luke would give his adopted family another Irish goodbye, just as Kurt's wife had done to him. He didn't wish that pain on anyone. Kurt drove straight through Portland, remarking to Luke that he'd rather drag his dick through a mile of glass than spend more than 15 minutes driving through town. He garnished a deep-seated hatred for the city he referred to as the Stain, a town flooded with racist, white supremacists, and lizard people. He said to the kid, "You know, it wasn't so long ago that the KKK still marched through these streets." Kurt had phoned Luke's mother and let her know he would be dropping off Luke in the next hour or so. She sounded elated, overcome with grief and joy all at once. Her maternal bond with Luke was strong, and Luke's grumpy dad could be heard hollering in the background, shouting, "Thank God, Jesus fucking Christ." In truth, Luke's father had spent many a nights weeping in the den while Dora slept, her solace to escape the horror that her son might have been killed or made a test subject. Her mind had traveled through all sorts of truths and paranoid delusions about the state of Luke. So now the boy was heading home, Kurt taking him to North Edmonds, where he lived in a large 4-bedroom home with vaulted ceilings and decorated in a way which all affluent white women chose to decorate, complete with a Buddha sculpture at the front door along with flowers and crystal vases, dried flowers and crystal vases. Kurt wasn't invited in for coffee, but he was tired, needing a long rest, having pushed himself to the limit while ingesting toddler speed and crushing cigarette after cigarette, black coffee, visions of nightmares. He had left Boris with Michelle at her apartment, and he was excited to see both of them. Kurt's last words to Luke were, "You got my number, Luke. I'm serious about your GED." Michelle was elated to see Kurt home safe and sound. The two were on an on-again, off-again basis. For now, a firm truce bringing them together. It had not been so in various months, things heading south and toxic as ever. Kurt getting choked and carrying her outside of the apartment while she kicked and screamed. They fared better living separately at this point in their relationship. The embers of such they had saved, hoping to bring things into a healthier undertone. Kurt crawled into her bed, sleeping another 24 hours, awakening with a strong caffeine headache, bordering a migraine. Made some poppy tea and got up to read the paper. There read the headline, "Mormon cult leaders charged in car bombing and human rights violations in secluded Utah town." Kurt's mouth went dry, wandering to the kitchen for some orange juice. What finally burst the bubble? Kurt read further that a group of women had reported to the FBI and local police of the testing of their children and murder of the bishop. Someone must not have gotten paid on the force, or were using the bus as leverage for their own safety. There was a mention of several cult members still under the influence of what doctors had claimed was likely LSD. The article had failed to mention anything about the hangar. Kurt found this to be highly expected. He wondered how the kid would take the news. It was certain his adopted mother had a grisly sense of love for Luke, grateful he had been removed from the site before mentioned in FBI reports. Kurt brought a check over to the bank that afternoon, taking Boris with him back to the sailboat. It felt cozy to be in the boat, putting his feet up and reaching for his king-size papers. What a fucking business it was. It grinded Kurt down to his last nerve. He needed true R&R to rebuild his strength, heading over to Best Cafe for an afternoon Long Island. One such Long Island at other bars never quite getting him there. He sat in silence, nursing his drinks and going over notes in his moleskin. Out of nowhere, Leroy appeared. "Yo, Kurt, just seen someone trifling Peckerwood casing your car." He had a bag on and was peering through the driver's side window. Kurt fired back. Just now, Leroy shot back. Just fucking now, boss. Go on now. Kurt was grateful. That was the city. That the city was his security system. For how much he was a loner, his drinking friends were forever on good terms. Leroy watched my drink. He bolted from the bar, heading half a block down to see a man getting ready to open the door to his Volvo. Easy dessert for planning a bomb. Kurt turned on his savage side, screaming in such a manner that terrified walkers-by had made the culprit shake at his knees. Kurt drew on the goon, placing an ice-cold gun barrel to the back of his head and walking him to the passenger side. Kurt ordered the man to get in the vehicle. After patting him down and finding nothing but tools and a pipe bomb on his person, Kurt remarked to the sharply dressed man, "I hope you like fish." The man had sandy blonde hair and blue eyes, facial structure resembling Mormons, by and large looking Down syndrome ridden and inbred. He awoke in Kurt's sailboat cabin, not recalling how he could have gotten there. Kurt had stuck a needle in him before he could cause the scene. In a moment of sheer horror, the man looked to his feet. Both of them were in tied laundry detergent boxes and swallowed in cement recently hardened. The boat bobbed in the wake of a skiff, terrifying the man. Kurt inquired, "So did Preston send you?" The man replied, "Preston's brother ordered the hit, trying to seal up a possible further leak to the press by the disappearance of Luke. Luke's not what you think. Luke's a part of the extraterrestrial study and exchange we had going until the bust. What is the immediate cause for my attempted assassination?" The man replied, "The being you know as Luke is a direct descendant of one of the ET's head offspring. He was a subject being used in studying Homo sapiens during childhood. His mind had been wiped of all memories. Through artificial insemination, he was planted in a Yupik woman's womb, only to have her taken away by the state. He's half Yupik, half extraterrestrial. His father used an instrument to lure him to SLC. His true nature would be revealed in time, but the study was not complete. Once you stepped into the picture and brought the kid all the way back to his foster parents, our leader ordered a hit on you." Kurt was silent. He sat still, processing the information. Finally, in a hyperactive gesture, he grabbed the man and reached for the duct tape and a gag. He strapped up the hitman, his hands under his shoulders, dragging him to the stern. The man's eyes boiled in fear. In a savage moment, Kurt lifted him and hucked him over the stern, disappearing into the murk. Kurt didn't like shitting where he lived, but found the execution of the goon necessary. He had studied the man's body language, eyes shifting to retain fact rather than manufacture lies. Kurt poured himself a quad-shot vodka tonic, needing to calm his trembling nerves. The pressure was building in his small cabin. He needed to release his demons, deciding upon a midnight stroll with the spirits. He went wandering, screaming. He felt good after his releasing of his emotions and bitterness of all that it was to be alive. What came next? It was a loaded question. Kurt felt the atoms in his bones aching and his heart gray. There was no point in running, and so he ventured back home. A light, cool rain beginning to fall, the spirits dancing. He gave in and gave up, leaving his fate up to Grandfather Sky. He turned to to the marina. He returned to the marina, falling into dreams in which he was looking at himself in a mirror, cutting off his shoulder-length hair, and wandering the downtown streets of Seattle, saying hello to the other night crawlers he had known for years, fearless. The rain damp and swirling with voices. Around 2 p.m. the following day, Kurt finally awoke, feeling as if a pig had shit in his head. Upon exiting the stern, he was greeted by a bundle of sunflowers. Amongst the flowers was a card sealed in red wax, written in cursive. Dear Kurt, let us make a truce. You stop getting in our business, we will stay out of yours. Sincerely, Angels of the Grand Staircase. So word had spread of his failed assassination attempt. Kurt's mind went to Leroy, who was a flagger and living at the poverty line. Kurt owed him a nice bottle of scotch, or perhaps some green chartreuse. STS-48 was said to have witnessed UFO activity from the 5-day mission in orbit around the Earth just 1 year prior in 1991. Naturally, the reporting on the incident had gone under the radar and had been suppressed from press field day. Even so, Kurt had known of the incident, also familiar with the Belgium sightings and the dozen occurring during the 1980s. It would be until 1997 that the mothership would appear over Phoenix, spotted by inhabitants in the thousands, complete with visual confirmation via camcorders. This incident would be firmly denied by the government, despite various clips broadcast on local television stations. These incidents would go on to be named the Phoenix Lights. Kurt didn't know it yet, but he had contact with Earth and had been occurring. He didn't know it yet, but contact with Earth had been occurring since human beings climbed out of the water and took to land, their compounds forming them from mushrooms and other organic substances, their bodies made of 60% water. For many indigenous tribes, the star people were sacred. This confused Kurt. Why had the beings not gone to visit the Zuni? Why choose the Mormons? Kurt summarized their curiosity just as strong as his, finding Mormons to be a rare breed of slimy lizard people. The man he had executed had been wearing black slacks, a white shirt, and a name tag, all with intent for murder. Kurt considered a trip down the coast to go off trail on Third Beach and set up camp while this thing would boil over. But they had called for a truce, the question being whether or not they meant they were truly calling a truce or if they really wanted him to put his guard down to assassinate him, leaving a dark bar or smothering him in his sleep. He had no leverage in this, none at all. He did the smartest thing he could do. He ventured over to Creighton's. Creighton was elated to see him, roasting a rabbit in the oven, the faint smell of sage, sweet grass, serenity. Kurt felt energized, leaving Creighton's shack with a stomach full of rabbit meat and fried potatoes. He decided to cruise down to the Blade, a stretch of Highway 99 known for hookers, dope, dive bars, filled with salty mossbacks and LA trash to boot. He pulled into a bar hysterically titled the Gravitron. These were Kurt's people, gamblers, former Panthers, ex-military, divorced aunts and uncles, prostitutes. Kurt was desperate to feel anonymous and would frequent this bar back in the day. He wondered of what would come of Luke, never thinking a missing person's case could burrow quite so deep. He wondered what job would come next. He ran his hands through his hair and ordered a Boilermaker. He felt at ease there, the weight of the world falling further and further away as he climbed the escalator to the moon, running hard and steady. He went over to the cigarette machine, settling on a pack of Camel non-filters, when a voice to his side spoke so he could hear. Doesn't this faggot belong in Capitol Hill, drinking at the cuff? Kurt grabbed the cigarettes out of the machine, producing a butterfly knife, swirling it in the man's face, stopping himself from slashing him. Kurt took the knife and placed it right back in his pocket. The man shaking, taking a seat. His outlook on Kurt changed drastically. Okay, I take it back. Kurt offered him a cigarette, lighting it for the man as he reached for his Zippo. He returned to his Boilermaker, taking it all down in one long swill. Before he knew it, he had made friends at the bar, discussing the Seahawks' use of AstroTurf on top of body hits. Kurt was the furthest thing from a sports freak, but read the sports page daily, as much of his clientele lived and breathed the Seahawks and Sonics. It paid off massively to know the up and up on athletics. Personally, Kurt, although now too beaten up by the job, used to be a committed skateboarder. Now he was feeling older all the time, his ankles popping at random instances, his shoulder never quite healing from a broken rotator cuff he damaged snowboarding. His mind drifted to Luke. He wondered how the kid was adjusting to life back at home. Suddenly his beeper went off. Luke's mother. Kurt went to the payphone, dropping in a quarter. The kid had hung himself from a pipe in the basement. There was no note. The coroner had already taken the body to the morgue. Luke's mother absolutely crushed it, his father refusing to get out of bed, feeling as if he had failed. The incident had sobered Kurt right up, washing his face, making his way toward the North Edmonds neighborhood where Luke was raised. The method to the kid's suicide had haunted Kurt, hanging the number one choice of suicide in rural Alaska. Kurt called a passing statement from the kid he should have pressed him about. Luke had mentioned he had speakers in his eardrums, attached to his nervous system. The voices often instructed the kid on what to do, and with or without the stabilization of clonazepam, Kurt had theorized the voices instructed Luke to hang himself. Whether it was delusion or reality, one thing was certain. The kid was gone, and his parents' heart summoned into an avalanche of pain. It was a lot to take in. Coincidentally, when Kurt called the morgue and spoke with an old cohort, he mentioned the kid's body had not come in that night. His parents decided upon cremation, and Kurt's contact claimed 4 men resembling FBI agents had cut off the body in the parking lot. His co-worker saying the body had been seized and placed in a truck with a coolant system marked Josiah's Meat Corporation. Kurt knew then and there that ETs had sent the men to seize the body. Kurt was unsure what would be done with the corpse other than the fact that the Star people had reclaimed it as their own. Kurt felt unsettled, so much work for nothing. He wasn't certain, but he took solace in the fact that Luke was likely to be brought back to life. What other reason would they want the corpse? Were there really speakers planted about his ears? Some hyper-advanced form of tubes? He wasn't sure of anything anymore. Up shit creek and out of whiskey. Kurt went home to get some rest, Boris greeting him with slobber and joy. Kurt looked down at him. I hope I get reincarnated as a dog in Seattle. He was battered thin by the all-nighter, desperately in need of sleep. Then the phone rang. He was beyond annoyed. Yeah, this is Kurt. The voice on the other end could only be heard breathing for several moments. Then it spoke. Kurt, this is Luke. Thank you for everything. Guess what? I met my mother. She's here with me now. I'm going home, Kurt. As the weeks went by, Kurt took on more and more open and shut cases. Adultery, missing persons. The Star people had honored the truce. It would be years before they crossed paths once more. Kurt had began having more terrifying nightmares, screaming at the top of his lungs, terrifying Michelle, who told Kurt he would scream in an unknown language. Due to his PTSD, Kurt's drinking raised in volume. Michelle, his best friend, telling Kurt his constant drunkenness had driven him back to living solo on the sailboat. In 1999, Kurt would find himself on another paranormal case leading to the Pasco to pick up a missing teenager from a crisis center. Spotting a strange being traipsing across the parking lot in a giant cloak, tusks running down the front of its snapping turtle facial structure, eyes burning like rubies in the light of the stars. Years of working paranormal cases had soured his human experience, planning on retiring in Oaxaca, putting away little by little in hopes that one day his stint with law enforcement would finally come to an end. He had enough of it, working himself like a sled dog, surging towards the stars on an icy trail. He recalled the white wolf who had visited him on a vision quest, perched high atop a mesa, staring into his eyes, transmitting peace, finally vanishing into a mirage. That night, Kurt produced a turtle shell rattle and unplugged the telephone, preparing to journey. After several long minutes, his mind had succumbed into a trance, traveling through a tree stump in the marina parking lot. Upon reaching the lower world, Kurt climbed onto the back of a caribou and began traveling at hyperactive speeds through rapidly changing microclimates. Suddenly, his power animal shot directly upward, traveling through the middle world and directly into the upper world, headed straight towards the moon, the land of the dead. It was there he saw his grandfather, smoking a pipe and living in a house of sod, an Irishman. He advised Kurt to enjoy his serenity, embrace life on his own terms, mind his patience. He assured Kurt it would not be long until he could truly retire. He disappeared, leaving Kurt in the dwelling, alone. Kurt felt a weight fall off his shoulders. Several years passed before a Christmas card arrived. It read, "Hello, Kurt. Doing well back home. Thank you for getting me to my mother. Sincerely, Luke." Kurt felt perplexed, the reminder of the case sending shockwaves through his body, sending him straight to the bar. Trying to explain the events of the several years summer in 92 to a friend or a stranger alike would only incite that Kurt had stepped off the edge of the earth. He kept these things to himself, journaling about them and then burning the pages in an act of ceremony as Creighton had advised. He needed to lose himself, disappearing to the timeshare. He and his ex-wife had decided to keep in both their names. It was remote, Molokai to be exact. It took a 747 to get you to Honolulu, then a transfer to a passenger plane. The ocean air was glorious, his stress falling away from him. The island had a rich history to it, particularly in the story of Father Damien, who tended to the lepers in the 18th century. Those with the disease picked up off the streets of Honolulu and shipped over to Molokai to live in quarantine. It was there that Father Damien took care of them till his death in 1889. Eventually, he too contracted leprosy, working till his death, a martyr and a saint. Kurt had always found his story one of great honor. He was held in high esteem by the Hawaiian people. Kurt sat on the lanai, drinking a beer and smoking a pinner, losing himself in the sunset, streaks of yellow and orange falling into ochre across the horizon, the low horizon. Locals patrolled the waters, and their own skiffs, chasing off yachts, dropping anchor, circling the boats with guns raised, screaming through bullhorns. The yachts on sacred ground. For Kurt, it was a beautiful sight. He didn't leave the island in 6 months, finally heading back to Seattle with an itch for the mainland. He had packed on some pounds, needing to get back to work. He had developed a no-strings-attached relationship with a cougar next door. Things had gone south with her, as she desperately wanted him to go with her back to Ohio. He couldn't take the awkwardness of her disappointment anymore. Sneaking out of the front door early one morning as she slept, he headed towards the airport to return to the Pacific Northwest, missing the rain pattering down on the sailboat, bobbing in the wake and wind, the classical station lulling him into dream states. He was in the middle of smudging when the phone rang, Kurt letting it get picked up by the answering machine. Kurt, this is Doris. You're never going to believe this, but Luke was here. He told us everything. Kurt pondered everything. He had left the fate of the kid up to the Creator. A wise choice. Kurt decided to celebrate, uncorking out 84 Malbec. He poured it good and tall into a mason jar, moving to the upper deck to smoke and drink while watching the sun fall away into dreams. For once it felt good to be alive. This was home. Kurt received a $1,000 bonus from Doris several days later. It meant the world to have her and her husband know he was alive. Bethel had solidified his spirit. He headed straight for the bar, wanting to forget, seeking freedom from the past. He was in dire need of a case that would lead him out of town. Before long, he would be given everything he asked for, whether he liked it or not. For now, he longed to forget, drinking up his bonus, at war with the gods, turmoil within, flipping him inside out. He was but a grain of sand on the ocean floor, life stifled by the clap of God. He drank to forget, staring forever into the future, transfixed by the chase. John S. Argetsinger, May 16, 2021, 10:40 p.m., Anchorage, Alaska. Quote, "Never fear another challenger, no matter how large. Never despise another challenger, no matter how small. Large does not always defeat little. Little can become large by constant building. Large can become little by falling apart. The Art of Peace."